Good evening. The Price of Everything emanated from a desire to explore the vagaries of today's art world, to dive deep into this universe with the hope of unearthing answers to questions about when the art world changed from a community of insiders to a global 24/7, $60 to $80 billion industry with its own set of rules, and what this all means for artists, art institutions, arts education, the transference of art, and even the actual art. The connective tissue linking the producers, director, entire creative team, the film stars, and HBO is a deep love of art and a profound appreciation for why art matters despite the background noise of the market. We were never looking to pop any bubbles, but rather seeking to spark dialogue, raise questions, and explore how this all came to be, which is why we're so deeply honored to be here tonight. The 92nd Street Y has always been a forum for constructive dialogue where the discomfort of raising challenging questions is encouraged. Along with my producing partners, Jennifer Stockman and Carla Solomon, thanks to Elise Myers, Susan Engels, and everyone at the 92nd Street Y for hosting this stellar panel featuring our film stars.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Stockman, and Carla will close the program after the panel tonight. And I have the pleasure of introducing the clips and then the panel. I don't want to give too much away with sharing biographies from each of our panel members because most of the world that's seeing the film will get to know them on screen. And I think that's really the best way to really get to know them and form your own opinions. But we did our best to put together a panel that showed the composite of the art world. Jeffrey Deitch will be moderating, and all of you know, I think each one of our panelists is a giant in their own areas, and Jeffrey has had a stellar career as a dealer and in New York for a long time, was director of MoCA, and most recently opened a gallery in LA, which I know is very exciting. You will meet Paul Schimmel in the first clip we're going to show you. Paul has been a curator for most of his adult life, and he had a 3-year stint at Hauser & Wirth in LA. And he is brilliant and has written a lot of books and so forth. So before I introduce the other two, why don't we just let you watch the first 8 minutes of the film. So there's only 90 more minutes to go, and we don't know how many of you have already seen the film and whether it would be better to see clips before or after, but hopefully this will encourage you either to see it for the first time or again. The voice you hear is of Nathaniel Kahn, our director, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here tonight, but he's in San Francisco doing something with a lot of directors of documentaries. This is the year of the documentary for some coincidental reason. I would next like to introduce Amy Cappellazzo. And if any of you here tonight are in the art world, you certainly know Amy. She is an auctioneer extraordinaire, and she was at Christie's. She's now at Sotheby's. I don't believe she's ever been at Phillips, but maybe what you don't know about her is that she was a curator too. And she, even though she's on the business end of things, she also has a deep love of art. So you'll meet Amy in person in a minute and a half, so just take a look at her clip now. You'll see that the entire film is this dance between art and the market. And we wanted to make the film in the first place because we, the producers, and of course Nathaniel, felt that art matters, and sometimes it's overshadowed by the market. But now I'd like to introduce our artist on the panel, and that's Marilyn Minter, who is wonderful in the film. And Marilyn has been painting probably for over 50 years and has very recently had a retrospective at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, fantastic, and it's traveled. Most museums today have her work in their collection, and not only is she such a uber-talented artist, she's also just a fantastic human being. So meet Marilyn. And now the real people will come out. Thank you.
Paul, you have one of the most memorable lines in the film. There is no golden age without gold. Are we in a golden age now, or are we in a precarious bubble that is about to burst? In the film, gallerist Gavin Brown says that he already smells the smoke.
Gavin's always smelled the smoke. I am sure we are in a golden age. I like all of us here, we've watched the trajectory of the contemporary art world over from the 70s to the present. And there's never been a period in the history of contemporary art where there has been more support for, interest in, and real, I would say, passion among the young people for the visual arts. Like the Golden Age, that was just a narrow sort of the bourgeoisie rising in Holland. Today you have that on a global level, and it has really made the art world, I think, far more generous in terms of looking at art from different parts of the world, different histories, different genres, and it's a moment where I am certain 100, 500 years from now, this will be seen as a golden age.
Oh, that's a very positive take on this. Let's see if everyone else shares that view. Amy, some of the reviews of the film characterize you as the villain. I know you better, so that's not my characterization. They see you as the villain representing the corrosive influence of money over art. Now, in earlier decades, the tastemakers were artists like Marcel Duchamp, curators like Alfred Barr, the critic Clement Greenberg, pioneering gallerists like Castelli and Sonnabend. So, Amy, today, are you and your auction colleagues art tastemakers?
Well, I'm not sure I should answer that on behalf. I mean, that's something someone else bestows upon you, rather than you declaring yourself to be that person. I mean, I think there are certain dealers that are still critical for setting an agenda and defining taste and picking artists and nurturing their careers, as there always have been. I try to just keep my head down and keep working every day, honestly. But I'd like to say, just if I could touch about the golden age, it was sort of like, I wanted that question, so I'm gonna like swap it around here. But I would say we probably are, but golden ages can last hundreds of years. The private accumulation of wealth in the last 20 years far surpasses any other time in global history. So it only makes sense that the desire for works of art will continue to be vast and insatiable, and that you might have periods of correction and periods of rebounding, but it only makes sense that certain things that are great will continue to become more valuable given the vast holdings of private wealth that have been made in the past, 20 years.
So I want to talk about making art. And so what is the effect of all this money on what the artist does? And has the increasing professionalization and monetization of art affected what artists make? I don't think it has affected what you make, but I have the sense that young artists have become a little more conservative, and that radicality in art is being pushed to the margins by this powerful art market.
Well, that's interesting. You're talking to me, right?
That's right, Marilyn.
Because we could all answer that.
Yeah.
No one better than you, so.
I do have an opinion about it. And I think money is like gravy. If you make it, you're lucky. And I read a lot of biographies of artists and how tough, I mean, it's really tough to do what you want to do in this world. And as an artist, you know, Matisse lost a kid at the age of 12. People aren't dying because they can't afford a doctor. The kid was 12 years old. It's tough to be an artist, and I tell all my students, don't do this unless you have no choice. And the money part, it's, you know, if you're lucky, you're going to be I think, this is my opinion only, if you're slightly marginalized, you're going to be able to concretize your vision. You can make art if you're slightly marginalized. The white heat is a burden to an artist. I've seen really great artists turn into parodies of what they're known for. And I think that very few people escape the white heat of some, and I'm not going to name names, but you know what I'm talking about. And I think if you're just slightly marginalized, like Kara Walker or Bruce Nauman or, who's the artist at the New Museum right now?
Sarah Lucas?
Yeah,
Sarah Lucas, right.
You know, you just can make your work from pure love of the making. And if you can get in that place and listen to your inner voice, it's heaven for an artist. And the marketplace, you sort of have to, I have to put it on the shelf. I don't look at anything. It's, you know, listing to $58 million for a painting, you know, that's way above my pay scale, you know. But as long as, I really feel lucky because it's only since my 50s that I've been able to, I don't have to teach now. I love teaching, I'll never give it up, but because I get fed by my students and I'm really a curious person. And I think in terms of, I just really believe if you have a radical idea, there's no way you're going to keep that. Even, you know, for instance, you think about, oh yes, it's not like when I moved here in the 70s. Everyone I knew got mugged. It was like dangerous to live in New York City. Now, when you move here, you don't live in New York City. That's a trade-off in a way. Okay, you're going to have to go to Ridgewood, or you're going to have to, that's New York City, but you don't live in Manhattan. And I'm thinking, you know, the struggle is part of the creative process. And I sort of believe artists need to fail a lot to be able to create their vision. It's, you know, it's like balance.
I always go see an artist's third show.
Yeah.
And when I see the third show, because then you sort of see who they are, and they've sort of tested a little bit the boundaries of what they're trying to do. And I say, is this artist motivated by freedom or motivated by money?
And you know right away.
And you kind of know that on the third show.
I know it right away immediately.
I mean, money's fool's gold compared to
first show. I know right away.
You know, you mentioned Bruce Nauman and Sarah Lucas, and I think both of them at a certain point, and for some of them, maybe at several points, they kind of zigged and maybe to get out of the limelight, to kind of own their future together.
Yeah, Bob Gober left town. He protects the creative process that way.
And in some ways, you know, even get more, make less pieces, get more controlling about where the work goes, tries to sort of distance themselves, and even, you know, sell works for a lot less than the secondary market so they can control where it goes and what happens to it.
Paul, I want to ask you about the consensus-making process. People are very intrigued by this, of who decides how art is valued.
It's
both
like so simple.
Well,
artists. Ultimately, artists decide in that, you know, we're in a great period of revisionism, both globally and in terms of generationally. And it is often younger artists who appreciate an oeuvre or an artist who had been overlooked, and all of a sudden, oh, you know what? Late Monet, maybe he wasn't so blind when Jackson Pollock and Joan Mitchell saw what they could take with it. In the long run, artists really are the ones, and I mean, you as a dealer, me as a curator, we listen to the same voices, and it's the voices not just of what artists say about their own generation, which sometimes can be more difficult to hear, as their sense of what's value that came before them. And that gives you a real clear sense of where the future is going.
And what about the role of the museum curator today versus the dealer and the auctioneer and the collector? Has the influence of the curator been diminished?
You know, I think the role of the curators, I mean, if you maybe look at it over a very short time, has been, you know, it seems up and down, and right now foundations with really brilliant collectors who have both the resources and the ambition to make the great collections have gotten ahead of what curators can do. On the other hand, I think overall, compared to this notion of the curator as a walker, which is where it really was in the, for most of the, I mean, with no, you know, if you didn't have an independent income, you wouldn't become a curator because there was really, to get a salary was considered inappropriate. It has become so much more both professionalized and valued. On the other hand, it has a lot to do with the community and their relationship to the institution, and has also a lot to do with the nature of the individual curator and their sense of commitment to a place or to a generation or to a history.
One of the most unsettling comments in the film was Serge Tiroche's allusion to the financial forces that have a role in determining artist prices. And some of you have seen the film. I think maybe it reminded you of the whispers about conspiracy theories in an Oliver Stone film. Amy, I wanted to ask you, what are these mysterious financial forces? And maybe they're not there at all.
Well, well, certain markets, certain artist markets, have interested parties in those markets. Now, you could argue any collector who's ever bought the work by that artist is an interested party in seeing that artist market be sort of validated in an auction environment or in a sale environment. So, suffice it to say, there's a lot of people that have that interest, and I think it's sometimes construed as a conflict of interest. But not all interests are conflicts of interests, and usually if there's a conflict of interest, it's often worth pursuing. Like there's something at the end of it that's worth it. If there were no conflict of interest whatsoever, and you were just sort of like, you know, comme ci, comme ça about it, I'm not sure it'd be worth pursuing, right? So there are lots of like organized pools of capital around certain artist markets because maybe they hold inventory, because they have an interest in seeing the market rise for this artist. You don't see many short plays in that. But
Amy, could you give some examples? I know people are reluctant to name names here, but where is there an example of some artists where these financial forces have distorted the normal art market consensus?
Well, I don't know if they've distorted it or reorganized it. I mean, there's all, you know, if you mirror this market with just larger markets, I mean, all sorts of other things can distort or reorganize markets too. Like technology does that. Flows of capital do that. Legislation or regulation does that. Those are the forces that can change a marketplace. So an artist market like Warhol, which has been very famously discussed and reported as having like an organized bodies or organized pools of capital around it. Famously, the Maghrabi family has been reported as being, in the press in multiple places, being very involved in the Warhol market with hundreds and hundreds of examples in their arsenal of inventory. You know, that's just a force in that market. So it's not really, I don't really have a moral position on it. Like you're allowed to buy whatever you want, and you know, maybe you have a, you know, organized interest in navy blue pinstripe suits, and you're like, that's your thing, and you're like, I mean, everybody has something they're searching for. So it does affect the market. It is a position in the marketplace, but I don't really, it's better that it's a free market than that it's a heavily regulated market. I think that would be far worse.
So there's
Because who would do the regulating?
Let's talk
This is
about
just, I would just like to say,
another-
who would be the regulators of the art market? That's the thing that would scare me.
Yes.
Like, that would be terrifying.
Yes.
Terrifying.
Yes. So there's another fascinating part of the film, and actually my favorite part is the auction of the work by Njideka Akunyili Crosby and the build up to it and this astonishing price. And then brilliant filmmaking. The film cuts to Njideka's studio, and you see her following the auction on the live stream on her laptop computer, and her very restrained but very concerned reaction.
Well, she's not going to make the money.
So how do you talk to your younger art students to prepare them for that phenomenon? Also, I want to ask Amy to give us some more insight on how a price goes from maybe $10,000 to only about 3 years later, 900, and a few years later than that, 3.5 million.
Right. Go ahead, Marilyn.
It's really dangerous. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous. And I see it all the time. People go way up and then they're destroyed.
Well, I mean, stardom is something, I mean, there are other industries that have stardom, right?
Yeah.
Anywhere there's talent, we have stardom to contend with. Musicians, actors, even writers sometimes have like 3 book deals in a row. I mean, we all know what that force is, and it's a tricky thing to negotiate and navigate because you've been conferred as excellent in some way. So then you got to keep it up, and you have to sort of.
Have you ever seen anyone get to that height and then drop out and then go back?
Yes,
certain, who?
I have. Well, George Condo did.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of artists who've
Who
sort of gotten up and came down. Well,
Bruce Nauman.
Bruce Nauman,
really?
yeah. Bruce Nauman's market was really.
He was rocking in
Terribly
the early
difficult.
70s.
Oh,
he was
sure.
like having
Yeah.
one-person shows, Leo Castelli, Whitney Museum, but you know,
Well,
But
you know,
it's not that the market punished him; it's that
he moved
grew.
away.
Right.
Well, that's a great freedom.
So let's talk about one of the other stars of the film, Larry Poons. Okay, so this story of the rise and the fall and the resurrection of the Larry Poons market. So you could look at this as a vindication of the art market. The art market ultimately gets it right. Or is this an indictment of the art market? Like, how could you have abandoned this extraordinary talent for all these years? Paul, I'd like to hear
I thought
your
it was a
perspective.
shame that everyone only talked about the ellipses. I felt really, if I was Larry, I would have decked somebody because they're in the background of these insane drip paintings that he would do on his staircase. And I look at them and think about what people are doing today in terms of falls. I'm thinking, why don't they like, you know, at least early 70s Larry Poons and give,
thick
you know, be a little, yeah, the really
God, they
thick,
were
glumpy
great.
kind of insane
Yeah.
paintings. And it's like, oh, we like clean, minimalist op art, Larry Poons, which deserve it.
Right
so,
after the ellipse.
yeah, there's a lot more work to be done.
I agree.
Always.
Well, there's recently been a fantastic show of those poured paintings, and I heard it was a sellout.
But we have historical corrections in the art market all the time. Like, it's not, I mean, I spend a good deal of my time, or at least my sort of pre-REM sleep, figuring out who the next one is, should be in a night sale and have a little historical correction. So every season I try to find a couple of artists that deserve a certain presence on the stage that haven't been like in a night sale, so to speak, who deserve that kind of correction. And usually I hit it right, pretty good batting average of hitting it right.
It's exciting to watch when you do hit it right.
Yeah.
Now, it's been reported that the majority of recent solo museum exhibitions in the United States feature artists represented by just 5 galleries. And we read about the military-industrial complex. Is there a gallery museum complex where the mega galleries control a large part of what we see in museums? And, Marilyn, have you found this to be an obstacle to your career?
It's an obstacle for sure. I do see, though, I don't feel so bad about it because I know no one ever bought Basquiat, at all, or Warhol. And now they're just going to have to pay a lot more money.
And what about the situation for women artists now?
Oh, well, it's getting much better. I mean, the canon, the white Western canon is starting to break down, and I think I agree with the golden age. It is the golden age for sure. And I think that's got to be healthy. And I like the idea that it has to go the other way for a really long time, and then there's going to be some balance. But I mean, to think of Joan Mitchell not being as important as Pollock, that's ridiculous. But I think that this is my opinion, I know nothing about any of this money-wise, but I see that the people that make these decisions, he's the male genius, you know, and he's got a really interesting story, right? And the peeing in the fireplace and dying young. And yes, he changed art history, but if you put a Pollock next to a Joan Mitchell, she kicks his ass.
Yeah.
Paul, I remember attending the amazing opening for the Takashi Murakami exhibition that you curated in 2007. It was the exhibition of the year. And the exhibition famously culminated in a Louis Vuitton boutique, a Murakami boutique that was built right into the exhibition. Did Louis Vuitton get more out of the show than MoCA? And given now this increasing, confusing fusion between art and fashion, would you curate the show the same way today?
You know, of course, the Louis Vuitton boutique was, it got the most press because people were literally lining up, hundreds of them, wealthy trustees, calling on the phone, who's going to get which ones, and so it created this enormous buzz. The other half of it was all of his funny little collectibles, which had actually, there were about 2,000 of them, had more space, but I wanted to show two parts of Murakami, his most, in a sense, brilliantly conceived and labored works, primarily paintings that he'd been intimately involved with their creation, and then both the consumer goods at the high level and at the low level. And I thought it was the most damn clever thing I had ever come up with. However, it was like the tail did wag the dog. It really changed, I think, people's expectations of what an exhibition should do. And I remember telling Takashi a couple of years later, I said, you know, the problem with your show is after you, all they want is Takashi Murakami. Meaning they wanted that kind of income from visitorship, that kind of retail income, and they certainly would have liked to have had a larger portion of what Louis Vuitton and Murakami made from the commercial goods, which MoCA had no interest in, as it shouldn't. Otherwise, it would have been a very big conflict.
So the most talked about exhibition in Los Angeles right now is the mix-up of Virgil Abloh and Takashi Murakami at Gagosian Gallery, where I didn't go to the opening, but I heard there were thousands of people clamoring to get in, security having to deal with all the crowd control issues, and work snapped up for millions. So is this real art, or is this some sort of new fusion of art, fashion, and what Barbara Rose in the film decries as luxury branding?
You know, I'm not being, I haven't seen it, so I have no idea. More often than not, collaborations are not historically as interesting as what artists make on their own. My sense of the great things that Takashi has done are the ones that as I said earlier, they're two-dimensional primarily. They are on his own, and they are things that he labored over, endlessly, like Tantanbo puking, or where you get the sense that it wasn't and you alluded to this earlier. I kind of wonder, in a couple of 100 years, if we're going to make the same categorization that we make with many old masters. Is it a Rubens? Is it from the studio of Rubens? Is it a follower of Rubens? And are we going to look at some of the most productive artists of our generation who have vast studios and start differentiating between that which one knows the artist had a certain kind of absolute engagement, whereas the others maybe were made for an exhibition in a less important or significant time in the artist's life?
Jennifer Stockman, one of the film's producers, told me that when the film is shown in various locations around the US, Miami, the question that the audience is most concerned about is their astonishment that Jeff Koons does not touch his paintings. He just directs them. And Amy, I'd like to ask your opinion on this. There was a great leap in the understanding of art when people accepted that Duchamp's concept of the work was what was valuable, rather than a craftsman actually making the painting. I want to get your take on the Jeff Koons situation, and do you think that there's going to be some adjustment in the market against artists who are fabricators rather than craftsmen?
The Duchamp urinal is from 1917, so it's had its 100th anniversary, and we well accept that an artist can sort of make a work of art largely based on conceptual underpinning, and that execution can come. In the case of Duchamp, it was a found object, a ready-made, but in the case of Jeff Koons, it's outside fabricators and very highly technical, technology-based production, as well as people who are acting as studio assistants, executing the paintings and making them accordingly. I mean, I think after 100 years, people are accustomed to this idea. Even if it is still shocking when you tell people it's been going on for 100 years, they sort of get it. I mean, it's a bit like a musician who uses electronic synthesizers or something to make music. I mean, I think there's a certain permission or a sort of creative leeway to accept that there's many different ways to make something. And the artist, like in his studio, freezing cold, wearing a beret and a palette, like it might not quite be like that anymore. I don't know if there'll be diminution of value. I think fear is always overproduction. And being a very exacting editor, most artists can't self-edit. The very best dealers in the world are editors. They're not real, it's not about selling the work. It's about, do they help the artist edit their work and make sure only the best of what they've made make it out there in the world?
Well, just as an aside, I remember the story of how Leo Castelli canceled an entire show of Cy Twombly in still the late 50s. It's the Lexington series. He didn't think it was up to it. And then years later, it's one of the most desired bodies of work. So Amy, I want to ask you about the most talked about event in the art market this fall. So the most talked about event was not another mega price setting records. It was Banksy's intervention in your London auction with his self-destructing painting, The Last Lot, in your London October sale. So we all want to know, of course, was this an inside job? Was Sotheby's in on it?
Well, I can tell you, wholeheartedly, we were definitely not in it. We had no idea whatsoever, and we were all as shocked as the room was, for sure. As you know, Banksy doesn't typically make an evening sale. It's not a common artist in the evening sale. Banksy usually is in the day sale with lots of other artists of his generational his generational peers and also many things at that price point that typical works by Banksy sell at. So the youngest person on the team in London got the phone call from a woman who said she had worked for Banksy and received it as a gift. Now, as you know, many people do receive gifts from artists, and many things that get sold come via a gift from the artist. She apparently said she had worked in the studio for a while and got this from Banksy as a gift. So my very young colleague, still in his early 20s, took the phone call. He's very passionate about Banksy. He took the consignment. It was a good consignment. He made good terms. We took the work in, and he said to his boss, my colleague Alex Branchik, who's the head of the London department, they want it in the evening sale. And Alex was like, I don't really want this Banksy in the evening sale. I'm kind of aiming for something a little higher, but we'll put it in the evening sale if it can be the last lot, which is sometimes the, sometimes can be a difficult place in the sale. But we knew at the price point it was priced at, it would sell. You always want the last lot to sell, and to sell pretty well, because it's sort of the finale of the sale. So we made it the last lot, but we had a lot that had to be reopened after from the Tiger sale, actually. So while it was the last lot, testimony to the fact that we didn't know this would happen is we had to reopen another lot where there was a dropped phone line, so we reopened it at the end. But it was in this clunky frame. The instructions were we couldn't take it out of the frame. It was an artist frame and it had to stay. That's also very typical. We get lots of things in bad, ugly frames, but they were artist frames or part of the work themselves, so we can't change them out. And then, there he walked in with somebody walked in with a little remote control and tripped the whole thing off, and it was a big scene. I thought it was kind of cool for the moment. I didn't mind the disruption. I thought it was kind of funny and cool. Then it went on for days and days and days. I was like, all right already, who cares? It's sort of, that was then. This is now, it's Tuesday. That was Friday.
So that leads to another question.
Yes.
Okay, which is very interesting for me. Okay, and it did go on for days. So there are some very clever disruptors lurking behind the art system. And disruptors like Banksy, who can leap over the entire process. He connects directly with the public without the need for a gallery or art critics or curators supporting him. So, a question for Marilyn and for Paul. Will artists who have this mastery of social media and who can deal directly, connecting directly with the audience, are they going to make parts of the whole curatorial market system obsolete? And perhaps we'll see a diminishing influence of the auction gallery structure, just like we've seen a diminished influence of magazines and newspapers because of the internet and Twitter?
Yeah, I'm not sure they're actually disrupting the system. I think in some ways they're very cleverly showing what the system is, and I mean, this only really worked because it was in an auction, et cetera. And I think artists have, in a way, sort of leapfrogged throughout the history of art. But I think of somebody like Ed Kienholz, right? The Ferris Gallery, not only showing, the work, but how it's going to get shown, who's going to get to review it. And I mean, artists have always had an interest in Klaus Oldenburg opening up the store, kind of breaking those boundaries. A lot depends on how much it takes over their life. I mean, for somebody like Takashi, I worry that he has so many employees, and with the galleries that he runs, in Tokyo, that you don't get to spend as much time on making things, which is, I guess, old-fashioned.
The least vulnerable is probably the art businesses, auction houses, etc. No matter what happens in the way that other things are disrupted, you'll always need an arbiter of value, and that will probably be the auction houses for a long time.
So Instagram is good. I think Instagram is information. But I don't think anyone should buy anything unless they see it in person, at least if it's over $100. But,
right.
But
that's a
I
good
think
threshold, really.
It's about information,
right.
and information is healthy. Making decisions about quality.
Amy, I read that the Sotheby's art advisory team traveled to Saudi Arabia right after this controversial, sensational sale of the Leonardo supposedly to the Crown Prince, and that Sotheby's has a big project to advise on a massive contemporary art project, a massive contemporary art installation in Saudi Arabia. So I've always believed in art as a platform for tolerance and cross-cultural understanding, but after recent events, should auction houses, galleries, and artists be rushing to Saudi Arabia to sell contemporary art? And will Sotheby's be continuing its initiative there?
That's a very good question. Well, I personally was not involved and didn't travel to Saudi Arabia. I've never been in my life. One of my colleagues went, and there is an advisory committee made up of largely Western museum directors and art critics, writers, about a would-be cultural project that takes place in an archaeological site. So it's sort of a cultural site looking to be a more expanded cultural site that moves into contemporary culture. Certainly the events in Saudi Arabia were concerning to everyone. I know there was a big business conference planned, and our CEO declined to attend after the events with Khashoggi and the journalist who was killed. So I think certainly art is the platform, and we have to, you know, I've seen art be this amazing conduit to conversations that otherwise could never happen between people. And I'd like to believe that it always has that power or that capacity. And I know all of you have seen that and felt that as well. With regards to larger geopolitical issues, I think I'm reading the papers like you. We have, you know, no special insight and hope to kind of make the right decisions based on what information is gathered. But the advisory project is only in a preliminary stage and hasn't, almost like an investigative stage, and hasn't really gone into the next level at all. So remains to be seen.
Marilyn, I'd like to ask you a final question. So we're here 2 days before a very crucial election.
Here's my pen.
And yes. And we're talking here about the art market, but the context of some very serious challenges to democracy and our exercise of free speech. I know that you spent the day at the protest factory.
In his gallery.
I'm hosting at the gallery. So to what degree should we be, as artists, art professionals, doing business as usual, as we believe in just the art itself is a protest against intolerance, but should we be doing something more?
Well, democracy is pretty fragile right now, and I think we have to do everything we can, because we have 2 days where we can put a break on this insanity and stop the hatred. And I think that in the protest factory we have what we are good at is getting artists, our contemporaries, to produce editions for less than $1,500, and we sell them out immediately. And with that money, we give it to Swing Left, who is paying for buses to go to swing districts in Staten Island, Jersey, and upstate New York to canvas, which is the most effective way to change people's minds. And we have a script, and I think we're able to raise this money, and it makes me feel really good about doing it. And I think if you want to participate, go to Downtown for Democracy and buy our stuff. Or come to the protest factory, right? I mean, just the other day it was, you know, Cecily Brown and Amy Stillman and Catherine Bernhardt and Wendy White just making protest signs all day long. Not going to see that every day.
Well, I hope that's an example for other communities. I hope that engineers and teachers and office workers all over can do the equivalent.
Me too.
So we have some interesting questions from the audience. And one at the top of the pile is, what is the role of money laundering in the art world?
I can answer that. So money laundering is always a very interesting question. So the auction houses are required to comply with the Know Your Client sort of Bush administration legislation around money laundering. So it's pretty hard to send money to a weird place or to accept a consignment from a weird owner where provenance can't be tracked all the way through or something. So I can't say I've never seen people try, but I can tell you that it's the auction houses, and I've worked at the two major ones, always stay ahead of regulation by being extra compliant and extra diligent in making sure that they're not wading into those waters. But look, there's lots of people in the world who made their money by stealing it. They just didn't happen to make it in America, probably, and that's, you know, there's certainly an uneven application of legal and moral condition by which money was made, so that's tricky. Find the best question.
A few of these questions we've already dealt with a little bit, but someone is asking, what causes an artist to be hot again? So you mentioned George Condo. How did George Condo become hot again?
Well, that's a really interesting, maybe we should ask George that question. George, how'd you get hot again? How'd you do that? How'd you turn yourself back on? Well, sometimes consensus can come around critically, but always artists are involved in this. I agree that artists decide. Sometimes there can be a sort of just a real spark of genius, like an amazing body of work that no one thought the artist could. Maybe the artist didn't even think they could pull it out of themselves, but something magical happens, and there's a great body of work after 10 years of something rather fallow, and so that can happen. It's like, how does anyone turn it on again?
And sometimes
everyone in the audience over 50, how do you turn it on again? Right? It's sort of
sometimes it's just by kind of sort of staying their own course and letting the world come around to them, and they seem like friggin' geniuses because they didn't chase the world, they let it come to them.
He's got this amazing skill level.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've seen so many different bodies of work. The hardest thing there is to change the vernacular 3 or 4 times in your career, like Picasso did or Warhol.
Right.
You know, that's the hardest thing there is to do. But you see artists known for one thing, and then they become like making that one thing over and over. Everybody wants that one thing. I don't know if that happens anymore. Does that flood the market?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of young artists who get very early success, and they can't, they can't figure out how to, they're afraid to leave what they've been successful at because they don't have enough depth of experience to know that the experimentation is worth the work, or they're not confident that they can change their style and people will still love them and want to buy their work. So they get
often
trapped.
Dealers get blamed or their collectors get blamed, but the truth is the artist is ultimately responsible for saying, you know what, I don't really need to do this again.
Yeah.
I need to move on.
You have to like freedom more than money. You have to decide that your own freedom is the most valuable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, that's for all of us. Just saying, but.
Another member of the audience is asking about the importance of art critics. So when I got involved in the art world in the early 70s, the critics were like gods.
Gods.
Yeah, Clement Greenberg, Lucy Lepard, and I was in awe of that.
Hilton Kramer.
Hilton Kramer, right. Robert Hughes, Grace Gluck, the old school, yeah.
So what happened to art critics? And, well, why don't, for instance, why wouldn't there just be a necessity to have an art critic here with us? Paul, you're also a writer. But so what happened to the situation with art critics in the art world now?
Publications.
Publications, yeah. Galleries don't like it when you write bad reviews of their artists.
And there's just not that many venues. There are actually extraordinary writers out there. Often they get their employment through commercial galleries, writing essays, often at the invitation of an artist who says, well, I want this person to write. But I mean, in Los Angeles, there's one newspaper, and you don't have the kind of diversity that, let's say, you have in London. It really does take a lot of venues. Plus, frankly, you know, if you think curators or museum professionals are, in a sense, appreciated, people who write art criticism,
You're paid nothing.
yeah.
I think it was.
I mean, either you teach or you do like Clem Greenberg did, even one of the greatest, you end up becoming a kind of gallerist.
Right.
So it's interesting, like a theater critic can kill an exhibition, can kill a production with one review. It doesn't seem that an art critic has that same sort of power.
Not anymore.
No, I watched it happen. I watched it happen. Roberta Smith wrote a review of Robert Longo, and the title was Robert Long Ago.
Robert Longo. That was a long time ago, though.
That was a long time ago.
So, like, not since social media, and not since we do not believe in singular authority in the same way we used to.
That's
We simply do not as a
Yeah, and even look, I got more bad reviews for Helter Skelter than anything I've ever done in my life, including the New York Times saying the evil of banality, the banality of evil. You know, I mean, and you know, full page, and it's weird, but. These things take on their own history. In fact, maybe one bad review can kill you, but 50, not at all.
Right.
That's right. That's a badge of honor.
Depends on the critic, though, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so few that have authority, and we all know them, and you know, Roberta Smith and Peter Sheldon, and Christopher Knight, but they're a dying breed. I mean, I don't even know art critics of my generation who have that kind of pull or are on the way up. I think it was Peter who said something like, was it Peter or Dave Hick? I sort of can't remember, maybe you can help me fill this in, but sort of like when God made the world, he was almost finished, said, I guess we should have an art critic. And it was sort of the last job, you know, the last thing that could be.
Dave Hickey in the Chiso Mountains.
Right. Yeah. Just, it's the last thing you'd bestow upon the world. It's like, you know.
Who are the up-and-coming Dave Hickeys and Roberta Smith?
They just don't exist in that same way where you're tracking them.
There are some superb writers.
There are, but they're not like Olympic athletes, like in that same way. You know.
I'm very impressed by Jason Farago in the New York Times, taking art criticism to a new level. And there's some superb writers. I'd mentioned Sarah Lara Graver, who's in Los Angeles, who does write essays for catalogs, as there isn't another venue. She's extraordinary. And so there's great writing out there. So I think we have finished our allocation time, and one of the producers is going to come out and close the event. So thank you very much for staying with us. And thank you so much, Marilyn, Paul, Amy.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
You know, we're all friends, and so, you know, this is kind of what we might discuss if we were back in the green room before going out. So thank you very much for joining us.
Just wanted to say to all four of you, Amy, Paul, Jeffrey, and Marilyn again, not only thank you. Not only are you such vibrant characters on screen, not only have you supported the film's rollout by your presence on countless occasions between Sundance and today, but this evening you've given us all a powerful example of the infinite number of important dialogues this film has always been intended to inspire. The first goal of the film team, when asked what we would envision as the film's lasting mark on audience, it really is just this kind of conversation about the infinite dimensions of what can happen when art making and those driven to do just that collide with a market, in at least a very visible portion of which the boundaries between art and commodity are increasingly blurred. And what better place to have this kind of dialogue than at the 92nd Street Y, where this kind of boundary, culture, and discipline crossing conversation is essential to its mission, always has been, has made its own mark on our incredible city and its energy and diversity and the fabric of all of the programs that come out of this building and beyond. Thank you again, 92nd Street Y, for hosting us so graciously this evening. And finally, thank all of you for coming and for participating. If you haven't seen The Price of Everything, please do, and preferably more than once, both at the Quad or in a couple of the cities where it's still playing, and certainly when it comes to HBO very soon, November 12th. When you do, please be especially aware, most of all, of the ways in which the alchemy of documentary filmmaking itself, that mix of, for which there's no one recipe at all, infinite number, directorial point of view, character, narrative, and editing, create something in music, archival footage, lots and lots of ingredients in that mix. But they all together create something that's greater than the sum of the parts of all of the compelling issues that any film contains or touches on and is most worth watching in and of itself. Thank you all for coming.